A subcommittee will come to order. The purpose of today's hearing is to receive testimony on 3 bills, all on the important topic of forest management. For decades, our national forests and our rural and forested communities had a mutually beneficial relationship largely focused on timber production. It created good-paying jobs to support families. It reduced wildfire fuel load and created wildlife habitat. It generated income that could be shared with communities to provide such essential benefits and services as roads, schools, and law enforcement. This all began to change in the late 1980s and 1990s. Across the United States, timber harvest from federal forested lands fell by more than 8 billion board feet, a decline of more than 80%. This abrupt drop in production levels was the result of numerous constraints on harvesting timber, including timber sales litigation and the listing of threatened and endangered species. Mills shuttered their operations, and timber processing capacity in Wyoming and in other western states was lost. Our once vibrant rural and forested communities were no more. Populations declined, schools closed, double-digit unemployment became the new normal. The few mills that were able to survive continued to struggle to keep going given the uncertainty of supply. I'd like to welcome Jim Nyman, one of these mill owners headquartered in Hewlett, Wyoming, to the committee. We now have rural and forested communities across the West dependent upon federal subsidies like the Secure Rural Schools to provide basic services. Secure Rural Schools subsidies are not sustainable, nor are they the long-term solution that rural counties need. Reducing timber production also negatively impacted the health of our forests. The lack of active forest management, coupled with a policy of fire exclusion, created the perfect storm for catastrophic unnatural wildfire. According to the Forest Service, between 62 and 82 million acres are in need of treatment and at risk of catastrophic wildfire. That's over 40% of the entire national forest system, and the number is growing. I'm not suggesting we turn back the clock to the so-called timber heydays. That's not realistic, but we can't allow the status quo to continue. Congress must act for the health of our forests and for the survival of our communities. A number of actions are necessary. We hear most often about the escalating costs of wildfire suppression and how year after year the agencies are forced to tap existing non-fire accounts. Congress must end the practice of fire borrowing. We can't continue borrowing money to fight fires from the very accounts that help reduce the risk and the cost of wildfire. Instead, Congress must responsibly budget for wildfire management without resorting to budget gimmicks. The Senate Interior Appropriations Bill provides a fiscally responsible approach that ends fire borrowing. I commend Senator Murkowski for advancing a reasonable solution on this difficult issue. To be clear, our forest management problem is not simply a fire budgeting or money problem, it's a prioritization problem. Right now, I see no higher priority for the Forest Service than treating our forests to make them healthy again. Treating our forests is the best medicine we have to reduce fire risk, to bring down the cost of fighting fire over time, and to continue to provide recreation, clean water, and quality habitat for wildlife. It is the only sustainable way to provide the jobs and economic activity our rural and forested communities desperately need. My bill, S. 1691, makes treating our forests the priority it needs to be. Congress must help the Forest Service get treatments implemented at the same pace and scale fire and other disturbances are occurring. A 2007 Forest Service NEPA feasibility analysis determined that the best estimated average for environmental review costs was $365 million a year. In addition to the excess costs, these environmental reviews take far too long to complete, if they are completed at all. The Forest Service estimates that on average, it takes over 3 years to prepare an environmental impact statement and nearly 2 years to prepare an environmental assessment. Given the crisis situation in our forests, this is wasted time, wasted taxpayer money, and wasted staff hours that we can't afford to spare. Excessive environmental analysis are only a lightning strike away from hurting, not helping, our national forests. My bill will restore rationality to the NEPA process without eliminating environmental reviews or public involvement. It also provides categorical exclusion for certain types of needed forest projects to get them implemented more quickly. To further address the ever-present threat of litigation, the bill offers arbitration as an alternative dispute resolution tool. The use of arbitration by the Secretary would be totally discretionary and limited in scope. S-1691 would also deter extraneous lawsuits by requiring a bond to be posted covering the cost of the Forest Service to defend the lawsuit. This may seem harsh to some, but it has existed on tribal lands without incident. I'm hopeful we can work together, this committee and the administration, to enhance the legislation and end the status quo. The very health of our forests, our watersheds, our wildlife, our communities depend on it. I also want to briefly touch on the other bills we have on the agenda. S-132 is Senator Wyden's Oregon and California lands bill. I know that resolving the challenge associated with the management of the ONC lands is something that Senator Wyden is very committed to. I do have some concerns with the bill as drafted, and my concern is that it locks up nearly 1 million acres in various land conservation designations, including wilderness, and I also understand it lacks the support from the local communities. I do want to work with Senator Wyden on ONC, and I'm hopeful we can get there. We also have S-326, Senator Flake's Stewardship End Result Contracting Act. This committee in the 113th Congress reported S-1300, which reauthorized and made improvements to the Stewardship Contracting Authority. The 2014 Farm Bill included many of the provisions of S-1300, but did not incorporate the cancellation ceiling modifications. Senator Flake's bill would address that issue. It's a bipartisan bill, and I'm glad we could include it in the hearing today. Senator Flake is chairing a hearing in the Foreign Relations Committee at this time and is unable to attend the hearing. So I ask unanimous consent that his statement be entered in the record. With no objection, it is so ordered. With that, I want to thank our witnesses for being here. Your comments, Senator Wyden, and those of us from the West try to get home just about every weekend. And I know we're all going to try to do it again this weekend. It's Frontier Days in Cheyenne, so looking forward to the daddy of them all. With that, we have people here to testify. Witnesses, Mr. Thomas Tidwell, Chief of the U.S. Forest Service, Mr. Steve Ellis, Deputy Director of Operations for the Bureau of Land Management, Mr. Mike Matz, the Director of Public Lands for the Pew Charitable Trust, Mr. Jim Nyman, Vice President and CEO of Nyman Enterprises, and Mr. Steve Swanson, President and CEO for the Swanson Group. At the end of the witness testimony, we'll begin questions. Your full written testimony will be made part of the official record, so please try to keep your statements to 5 minutes so that we may have time for questions. Look forward to hearing your testimony, beginning with Chief Tidwell.